Welcome to a very special episode of Wide Open Throttle. I'm Edward Lowe, Editor-in-Chief of MotorTrend, here to discuss our June cover story, which goes on sale right about now, which is the Apple car. Basically, our exhaustively researched, comprehensively covered, but entirely speculative thoughts on what the Apple car could be. I'm joined by 5 guests from various parts of the auto and tech industry. We have Mikey Campbell, Senior Editor at AppleInsider. Tim Huntzinger, who's a Professor of Graduate Transportation Design at Art Center College of Design. We have Garrett Debry, who is an industrial designer and graduate of Art Center's Transportation Design program. We have Tim Stevens from CNET's Roadshow, Editor-in-Chief. And Kim Reynolds, our Testing Director at MotorTrend. Now, for those of you not familiar with the Apple car, because it's, again, hitting newsstands right now, let's do a quick overview of what it is, because I think it was quite shocking for people who have seen it. Kim, do you want to talk real briefly about what it was? And Garrett, please join in. I know you were instrumental in its conception.
Sure. So what you see here, and also the other images, is what we've come up with. And it really is a distillation of a lot of thinking. It's as much thinking as it is car, maybe more thinking than car. It's all about an experience that designs the car. It creates the shape based on what the entire experience of moving around in a vehicle in the future will be about. And so Garrett's the actual designer, so we'll let him speak to that.
Right. We sat around in a round table at Art Center with many of the future designers and grad students, and also Stuart Reed, our department chair. And we spoke about Apple, and we actually had a MacBook that was sitting on the desk, and we talked about how simple, minimal. We saw what Apple was able to do by taking, we drew a picture of an example of a flip phone on the wall, buttons, all these other gadgets and things, and comparing that to how simple an iPhone is. And there was talk of how Richard Kim had mentioned that the i3 was a little bit of the anti-car because they're so much more focused upon the experience of the vehicle. So looking at that, it's been kind of polarizing so far as we've had reviews of what people thought of the vehicle. The idea was to make it as simple, minimal as possible so that people are more focused upon the new experience that Apple's going to bring. That it is an extension of your device, your Apple subscription or your Apple membership, that this will be something that's so much better that will play into the rest of your life.
So we have a vehicle. We haven't talked a lot about what's in it, but I wanted to bring in the tech experts that we have at the table. So Mikey, Tim, you guys, I've talked to you. We had you sign an NDA. We didn't show you anything on it, and we told you, we were upfront that this is, again, entirely speculative. It's just the ideas of some of the gentlemen around this table. Then we sent you the document of the story. What were your thoughts, Tim?
I think conceptually and from a functionality standpoint, it definitely fits in line with what we would expect to see from an Apple car, and certainly from a car, looking down the road 5 years or so. The minimalist design, the concept of a monovolume, I think is something that makes a lot of sense going forward. If you look at the Mercedes-Benz F015 concept, for example, the idea is that an autonomous car might just be a living room on wheels, so you want to have a nice open space and open volume inside, and this certainly delivers that. And the focus on aerodynamics, of course, as well, with the covered fenders on the rear wheels and the rear view cameras, for example, that makes a lot of sense too. But I gotta say, from an aesthetic standpoint, I don't know how I feel about it. I don't think that your average iPhone user would fall in love with this design. I think that's something that Apple's going to be pushed for, especially because Johnny Ive has said in the past that he's not a fan of minimal, plain cars. He drives Aston Martins, he drives Bentleys. I don't know that he would be in love with the look of this car. But from a functionality standpoint, yeah, I think this is in line with what we should expect.
What Apple might be more concerned about right now is what's going on the inside. We haven't really heard much in the way of rumors as far as the outer shell or what the cabin itself is going to look like. But if I were to just comment on this design, I think it is seamless like Apple's products. Johnny's language is kind of no creases like Garrett. And you can see that with, if you remember back to the Red auction, Johnny Ive and Mark Newson, they designed a desk made out of aluminum, right? And it was forged from like 3 pieces, I think, but it was welded in such a way that it looked like it was flowing. So I could see that kind of concept be brought over to the car, and it wouldn't be something that you've necessarily ever seen before in the automotive space. But then again, I don't know if that they're going to try to shift that paradigm in design. They're going to try to focus on the experience.
Tim, you were around the table at the initial conversation that Kim had at Art Center. What do you recall from that conversation? And did it translate into the finished product that we've created digitally?
Yeah, so I think what we focused on more than anything was actually the experience. I think that the thing that sells cars now is more about the experience and less about the styling. Though styling is important, and that is essential, that's what you see first, right? But what's going on inside the car is going to be what gives a lasting impression of whether you bought a quality product or not. But what we know that Apple is really good at is giving a great experience, and also understanding how things are manufactured in a way that provides that innate sense of I bought something of high quality, and that has to do with surface finish, materials, cut lines, etc. And so we can't expect that this car is going to would be something that would be very very well manufactured.
Now, Kim, did you set the stage for this story, for this concept around thoughts like this? Like when you first initiated this idea, what was going on in your head, and how did you select and approach the experts that we ended up working with?
It became reaching a critical mass that we need to start all talking about this thing because of how it can change the whole automotive landscape. There's the potential here of a major alteration in our world for everybody, not just car buffs, but everybody. And so we wanted to bring it to experts in different fields. So we have done a series of interviews with technology experts, but as design is so significant to Apple, it became quite obvious that we needed to go visit Art Center and have a roundtable discussion there with instructors as well as students to look at how they would approach creating a car like this and what kind of thought process they would have. So that is a big difference here with what we've done, is it's not just here we think the Apple car will look like that, but it's a process of talking to real experts and trying to create some truly educated perspectives on what this thing could be. And it's an ongoing process as we're witnessing here.
What we looked at is the experience, right? So we actually started with the inside of the vehicle. Okay. And so most cars are actually designed from the outside in, but we wanted to look at what the experience was on the inside of the vehicle and then design the vehicles outside to match that experience. So the outside is very simplistic, but the experiences for it on the inside through augmented reality, through connectivity, all of those actually lead us to kind of a changed experience from being kind of a driver's car to being an enjoyable place that you want to spend your time in traffic, which is kind of what we expect from cars nowadays.
Yeah, and I understand there was quite a debate early on whether the vehicle would even have a steering wheel, right? There's a conversation about is this going to be a purely autonomous vehicle? I mean, it's an electric vehicle as we decided very early on, but I mean, how did that ramp up? What was the cascade? I mean, you just walk in thinking, well, it's an Apple car, it's going to be electric, and then given where the world is, it's absolutely going to be autonomous?
Yeah, so it's quite common these days for people to say, oh, an upcoming car will be fully autonomous, but those of us who follow this subject know that that's actually quite difficult in some scenarios. So the steering wheel will probably hang around for a while for a lot of reasons. So that has to be part of it. But there's also other areas with the interior that you could speak to, Garrett, that relate to its potential as a shared use vehicle. So you had spoken about the center divider down the middle being there not only to support the seats and how you configured the interior, but also to create a sense of comfortable isolation from other occupants if this is a shared vehicle.
Thinking about people who are complete strangers occupying the same space, usually when you're on a train or a boxcar or something, the seats have a certain amount of space and it's a larger vehicle. Right. So within this smaller volume, I was trying to think, how would you enable some sense of privacy but still be an open environment. So that's where the idea of the central tunnel came to be. Whenever I get into a vehicle that has that much space, there's Cheerios or Dum Dum sucker sticks or something that's stuck down in there. So I wanted to completely eliminate that. How simple and minimalist and clean can we make that for the foot space? But then the center divider also helps you not have to be playing footsie. Or even on the airplane ride in here, we still had the armrest debate with the guy sitting next to me.
It was, the shape is because you wanted to maximize volume for passengers. And we've talked about this being, as Kim mentioned briefly, a shared use vehicle. So what that means is potentially like an Uber situation, Uber or Lyft, or some other car sharing that we maybe even like a zip car or car to go setup, where maybe these are parked in the street and you have an account on your iPhone and you can just go up and drive in and pick up people along the way. So you maximize the volume, you created the central rail for the seats that not only allow the seats to be sort of hung off of it, but also create a divider. And then the way it's merged into the interior, you have seamless, no gaps, no seams, no areas to collect the sort of the detritus from our daily goings on. So very clever, but it also, again, informs the way it looks. So I'm basically trying to tell people, look, look at the vehicle and really consider it, because it does have this sort of Gen 2 Prius sort of overall kind of vibe to it. But don't hold your tongue until you kind of dig deep, because I think we have a lot of very interesting ideas. Did I get that right, Campbell?
Yeah, true. And one thing I would notice just in our conversation here about the design and all this glass, a few of us saw the Model 3 Tesla last week. And notably, it has glass that begins way down there and ends way over here. Virtually, it's not really one piece, but it appears to be one piece of glass, like a complete canopy over the entire interior. Not that far from what this car is. So, maybe we're seeing sort of the growth of glass in these cars, perhaps Gorilla Glass. Architecturally, too, in terms of how people fit into these cars. Electric cars going forward are all slowly adopting the underfloor battery concept. That's generally becoming the accepted approach. Now that creates a problem with the back seat, because if you have a floor that's elevated and then you have a rear passenger in a seat, then that keeps raising the roof line. And then how do you finish it? What do you do back here? And that becomes a bit of a problem to not have a bulky tail on the thing. And what we saw from Tesla with the Model 3 is quite deliberately thin glass to minimize the roof thickness, to bring the roof height down a bit, to have a better profile. Porsche with the Mission E notably has holes in its floor where presumably the rear passenger's feet can go into, which would allow the seat height to be dropped as well. Also dealing with this balancing the underfloor battery with a profile of a car that's going to be attractive and aerodynamic. So glass roofs on cars like this, there's kind of not just an aesthetic aspect to it, but there's some practical logic behind it.
What about thermal load with a full glass roof? Is this something you guys must have?
That's an interesting question. So, I mean, the funny thing about cars that we don't often think about is that they spend most of their time sitting in a parking lot, right? I mean, that's not what we buy them for, but that is what they spend most of their life doing. With an electric car, it's really easy to have that car plugged in and taking care of its own thermal load while it's plugged in. When it's actually being enjoyed and driven, yeah, that becomes something more of an issue.
Let's pivot real quick. I want to bring back Mikey into this conversation. When we talk about a vehicle that will be used in a shared manner, we don't share our iPhones, we don't share our iPads. Does it make sense with Apple's sort of position as a luxury goods?
It would definitely be a departure. I mean, just myself, I'm reluctant to let other people use my iPad, right? I guess idea of changing or shifting gears as far as business model is concerned, Apple is not afraid to do that. So if they see an area in any industry where there's an opening, in this case being shared kind of autonomous vehicles, then yeah, I guess they would go for it. It perhaps not focusing completely on rolling out just a shared vehicle, but maybe a model that is shared, or some sort of tier, some sort of pricing tier, and then maybe have an extra one for the Apple Watch Edition version of the Apple Car, right? Apple Car Edition.
How do you have a shared anything, whether it's a vehicle or any other product, that still maintains a premium experience? Sharing is dubious at best, right? I mean, we talk about sharing as this wonderful thing, but when you have to share, it becomes difficult.
I guess if you literally apply it to Apple's current kind of offerings, it would be like saying if your own personal car is an iPhone, and you say the shared version is something like a iPad that a school buys, right? They do have these kind of separate entities. They do accommodate for sharing devices through software. So they could apply that same thinking to a car. But then again, I mean, Tim Cook can't go on stage and say this is our most personal device yet. And that's something that they love to do.
Because the interior is so digital and there's so many displays in there, ultimately you can do a lot of personalization. That's something we saw with the Chevy Bolt when they unveiled that, where the car recognizes you based on your phone, and then you can load up your personalization, your wallpaper, you can customize the interior. You can imagine having custom interior lighting colors and changing all sorts of things in the car based on you. So giving some of that personal experience without actually having to change the upholstery or the color of the car. And who knows, maybe we can even change the color of the car at some point in the future.
Because maybe what you're really owning is the experience, is Siri who knows you and is guiding you through your day and advising and suggesting and being a companion in the car, your chauffeur. And that's really the value here, and that's just the shell. That's just a physical shell that allows this to happen. It's the screen on which Siri is projected.
So inside the vehicle, there is this split idea between doing full-on heads-up display and then what do you actually see down below. Right. But we decided to go with something that was more seamless, something that would give you a much broader range of access to entertainment, apps. So we went with a full band that wraps around the interior that has projections.
Tim, this is a subject that you actually have quite a bit of expertise in. Can you help us out here?
So the technology that we looked at, Garrett and I, was laser projection technology. So instead of having something that is projecting light through a mask on the back, we're having lasers actually projecting light onto a surface.
I'm kind of a patent nerd, so Apple does have patents for laser projection technology and a suite of patents for augmented reality stuff, mostly as it applies to iOS devices, but the language is broad enough that it could be applied to a larger format like a windshield. So it's interesting to see a designer kind of arrive at these ideas independently, and then it kind of meshes with these patents that Apple has been working on for the past decade.
I don't want people at home thinking that when we're talking about augmented reality that we're talking about Oculus Rift and somebody wearing goggles while driving. Right. We're talking about projecting images onto the windshield, so you get an identification of a potential obstacle, a person walking in your path, or a vehicle coming at you, or as our story rendering shows, the restaurant you want to go to, or the turn you have to make ahead. I mean, this is not so far-fetched. I think we've seen it in certainly a Minority Report, a lot of different movies. But it is interesting that, as you said, of Apple filings for patents, and then to arrive at this from the design side, maybe independently of that, is very cool.
Yeah, I did like the idea of asking Siri, or Siri kind of telling, oh, you seem kind of tired today. You want to grab some coffee? And then Siri will automatically highlight that for you when it sees when it senses the coffee shop or something.
It really being a partner in your experience. You climb in and the seat is weighing you, and it realizes you haven't lost any weight despite the fact that the car knows Siri had taken you to your gym multiple times last week. So Siri suggests maybe we have something a little bit healthier and fewer calories today, and if you're going to eat at work, you might want to pick it up, and so recommends a good salad that a friend had highly recommended on Facebook. And this whole thing works together, and as it's guiding you to work, it takes you along that route to that restaurant, and then you see the restaurant outlined or highlighted on the windshield, so you know where you're going, and the whole thing sort of folds together.
to get there with CarPlay. We're kind of getting a taste of some of that functionality now, where Siri can make recommendations, or with Android Auto on the other side of things, where they're looking at your calendar, they're looking at what appointments you have coming up, they're looking at traffic to say you should really go this way now, you should leave now. Those sorts of things are helpful. But given that's such a core, I think we all agree that's kind of the core of what this is, I wouldn't be surprised if we actually see something like that in a production car from somebody else. Just because if we look at how Apple got in with the iPhone, they didn't jump right out and build a phone. They partnered with Motorola, and they made this horrible thing called the Rocker, which ultimately was an existing candy bar phone that Motorola had. But I think through the process of Apple getting involved with that, they learned a lot about the phone industry before they actually started to make their own phones. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of this technology taking a step beyond CarPlay inside of a Mercedes-Benz or inside of a BMW, like a boutique Apple experience within the car.
Before the arrival of
That would let them learn a whole lot about the industry that, I think they have so many unknown unknowns.
If I were to guess, I don't know that Apple would build a car outright, like you're saying, maybe like a partnership. And I thought the BMW thing would be a great jumping off point for them, because the LifeDrive platform itself is modular. It can be modular. So you can have the BMW drivetrain on the bottom. Apple doesn't have to invest that R&D. They don't have to create their own facilities or anything. They can just design a cabin to put over that. Right. So you have BMW drive technology underneath, while Apple, is off on the side developing their own technology on their own. So it'll give them a few years, but in that meantime, they can inure people to this new in-car experience.
Why not just buy Tesla? And it's come and gone and come and gone and come and gone. So what are your opinions on that?
I think they may have missed the boat on that one. I think in retrospect they probably wish that they had, or maybe they should wish that they had. I think that would have made this process a whole lot easier for them. But ultimately, we were talking earlier about how Tim Cook doesn't really want to do manufacturing. In fact, his big power play in Apple was getting Apple out of manufacturing. So they didn't have to worry about inventory. They didn't have to worry about staffing up for production, demand, that sort of thing. They can ultimately just deal with third parties and let them worry about all the hassles, and then just take the product in and sell.
But isn't that the presumption, though, that Apple is not really going to build a car? It would be a contracted car.
But Apple does they own a lease for $140 million, $138 million plot of land in San Jose that our source says some are mulling the idea of turning that into an R&D/manufacturing facility. So they do have the space, and other places I'm sure that we don't know about. But I think, just going back real quick about Apple buying Tesla, it would have tipped their hand in a real big way, right? If they purchased another auto company, it's no longer hearsay, it's no longer speculation. Tim Cook would have to come out and say, yes, we're at least dipping a toe into automotive.
What is the business case here? Is this real? Is it conceivable? That's a deep intake of breath here. Tim, do you want to comment on this?
So we were actually talking about this just a few minutes ago, that the margins on automobiles is so tight. And so coming from tech space, where margins are actually fairly good, you have to question why would someone want to get into the automotive industry?
It should be the Apple truck. Margins are huge on trucks.
Right.
So,
big Cummins diesel, yeah.
Right.
Well, so I don't know. I mean, we talk about why wouldn't they partner with somebody who already kind of knows this business and kind of knows the ins and outs. And the question, I think, is there anyone out there that they could actually partner with that would give them the freedom necessary to actually make something successful? And we look at the success of the Model 3. Clearly that's going into areas where electric cars have never been before, and actually the car industry hasn't been in a really, really long time.
We haven't seen that much excitement around an iPhone launch in a long time, as much as we saw about the Model 3 just a couple of weeks ago. Right, and I think that's going to be both encouraging and scary for Apple. It's encouraging because that excitement is out there. Now they can point to something and say, people are excited about a new car. If we do something genuinely different, people will line up to buy it, just like they've lined up to buy our products in the past.
The phenomena of the Model 3 reminds some of us older people of the 65 Mustang enthusiasm, where people lined up at a car dealership to place an order for a car. And that hasn't happened for decades now, and it's happening again. We're seeing the phenomena again. And it shows that there is a dormant interest in cars that has just been missed for too long by too many car companies, and that it's taking a real outsider to find again.
is this thing going to be fun? Is it going to be fun to drive? Like, come on, look at it. This is going to be the first, I think, exclamation. Then it's going to be, you're going to tell me this is going to somehow better my life because of this fun experience?
I think that what people think are fun is something that's consistently evolving. And this idea of experiences, digital media, these things are becoming more and more immersive. You say fun. I think are Apple products fun? Have you looked at it and said, am I having fun typing keys or just scrolling a wheel? It's more about what is the media, what is the freedom that it's giving you.
It's kind of Apple's deal to come in and not so much be a follower, but be a leader in that space. So to come in and say that they're going to go for the raw adrenaline experience and make something that is going to be quick and fun to drive, it's going to corner like nobody's business, like a Mini or something, or a Fiat, or I don't know, whatever. It's probably kind of missing the point. I think they're trying, if they do build a car, they're going to try to broaden the horizon of what people think about riding in a car.
I think we should remember that Apple does have a lot of hardcore car guys in the upper exec. Eddie Cuse is on the board of Ferrari. Johnny Ive goes to Goodwood every year. He was having so much fun in his Aston Martin that he wrecked it after getting it after a few months, went out and bought another one. And we have Julian Honig, who was a designer from Lamborghini, who works as an industrial designer at Apple. And he designed that crazy Audi concept in iRobot that was self-driving, but yet was also this incredible car that Will Smith was doing all sorts of crazy stuff in. So, there are some people in Apple that do appreciate the historic nature of high horsepower, high handling. So whether or not there isn't applicability for that in a kind of an autonomous future, I think that's a big question that we're all waiting to see how that plays out. But I wouldn't give up all hope in that.
If you hold certain buttons in the display of
the Model
X.
Model X. There's Easter eggs.
Yeah, Easter eggs, but one is the image blasts past you.
Right, like in Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly. To give this ludicrous, ludicrous and this. I mean, that's this kind of playful. What car company thinks to do that?
Well, I mean, just look at what they named on the other side of the business, SpaceX. What they've named the drone ship.
Yeah, right. But there does need to be that humor and lightness and pull people in, right?
What do you think the likelihood that this comes to market or doesn't?
Yeah, it remains to be seen. We know that they're having some sort of internal turmoils. We've seen some staff turnover. It's a little bit hard to tell exactly what's going on, but ultimately, I think they're finding that this is a little bit more of a complicated project than they envisioned. And Apple is not really famous, but is known for killing projects that are very mature and pretty much ready to go, but just weren't quite ready. The Apple Television was a legitimate thing. It was pretty much ready to roll, but they couldn't quite get the services where they wanted it, and so that was the end of it. I know of other products as well that have been pretty much ready to go that are now locked in some basement in Cupertino that maybe in decades we'll finally see, but ultimately are never really going to be sold to consumers.
Can't wait to see if this Apple car comes to fruition, and if so, what it looks like and how it performs. And on that note, I'd like to thank all of you gentlemen for joining us here. And also for you watching at home, if you liked this conversation, if you like what you've seen here, please subscribe to MotorTrend's YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/MotorTrend. And thank you for watching this special episode of Wide Open Throttle.